solve large, intractable problems.
It's a new venture altogether.
Your brain is a wild horse there.
Because remember, writing is not a team sport.
You are not selling horse carriages when there are cars.
I want to be known only as the trusted advisor.
More like a tourist.
Play to Potential podcast.
Bill had been very successful in his business career. Didn't feel like he needed to make any more money. One of the people we interviewed was Dan Rosenzweig, who's the CEO at a company called Chegg here in Silicon Valley. And Dan really credits Bill for saving Chegg and really helping turn that company around. And he said, when Bill showed up, he said, Bill, this is a quote from Bill, I don't take cash, I don't take stock, and I don't take shit. I hope I can say that on your podcast. And so, he just, he didn't take payment. He just wasn't interested in that. He was doing this because he felt that he had something he could help, that he was good at coaching and good at helping teams come together. And he believed in these companies.
Welcome to the 50th conversation at the Play to Potential podcast. This is your host Deepak Jayaraman here. I'm an executive coach and I engage with organizations and leaders during phases of high-stakes transitions, whether it's related to an organization or the leader's career. In this podcast series, I talk to leaders from multiple domains, CEOs, sportsmen, artists, thought leaders, and so on three broad themes: leadership, transitions, and careers. I see this as a lifelong pursuit of staying curious about these themes, and I hope to share what I learn along the way. And sincere thank you for your support and look forward to your company in the months and years to come. The vision at the Play to Potential podcast is to help you play to your unique potential by curating thought-provoking content that gets you to reflect on key questions that matter in your life and improve the quality of choices you make and to enhance your effectiveness across various domains of life. I realize that as a coach and as a transition advisor, my bandwidth is limited and I hope to make a difference to 20 to 50 leaders in a year. It is high touch, but I recognize that it's low reach. This podcast gives me an opportunity to extend that reach and make a difference at a slightly higher scale. On that note, I'm also excited to announce that through the podcast, we are supporting Antarang Foundation, a not-for-profit that I'm associated with that works with thousands of young adults who come from challenging backgrounds in some of the cities in India. As you would appreciate, running this podcast takes quite a bit of work. Coordinating with the speakers and getting time with them, preparing for the interview, post-interview edits, effort involved in breaking the conversation into nuggets, something that I believe is unique and distinct to the podcast, and so on. If you're deriving value from the podcast and want to show your gratitude, I would urge you to consider paying it forward for these individuals to play to their unique potential. I believe that potential is uniformly distributed, but unfortunately opportunity is not. Your contribution will help level the playing field a little bit as far as some of these individuals are concerned. To know more, please visit the Pay It Forward section at playtopotential.com for details. Let's now get to the conversation at hand today. My guest today is Alan Eagle, co-author of the book $1 Trillion Coach, the leadership playbook of Silicon Valley's Bill Campbell. He has written it along with Eric Schmidt and Jonathan Rosenberg, senior leaders of Google. The book is a tribute to Bill Campbell given the profound influence he's had on the who's who of Silicon Valley. And the book gives an insight into the methods of Bill Campbell and how he transitioned from a football coach to a business leader around 39 and subsequently transitioned to a pro bono coach at around 60. Without further ado, let's dive into the conversation about the $1 Trillion Coach with Alan Eagle. Alan, thanks so much for making the time. Excited to be talking to you.
Deepak, it's a pleasure. Nice to be talking to you as well.
And congratulations on the recently published book, $1 Trillion Coach, on Bill Campbell. I'd love to maybe level set a little bit. For the purpose of the listeners, why don't you tell us a little bit about Bill Campbell and possibly some of the lives that he's impacted?
Sure. Well, let me just start by talking, Bill was a renowned executive coach here in Silicon Valley. He was instrumental in the success of Google, as well as Apple and several other companies, Intuit and several other companies. He actually he passed away 3 years ago. He grew up in Pennsylvania, went to Columbia University in New York, and he played football there, and was a member of their last Ivy League champion way back in the early 60s. And then he went on to become a football coach, American football, of course, coached at Boston College and was the head coach at Columbia in the late 70s. So he started his career as a professional sports coach. He wasn't super successful. The Columbia teams did not do well. So at age 39, he left coaching and started his business career. He first went to work for an ad agency, then worked for Kodak. Through that, he met a guy named John Scully. John, of course, in 1983, came west to take over as CEO of Apple. And so when he came to Apple, he called Bill. And Bill came over to run sales and help with marketing at Apple. So that started a very successful business career that saw him rise to become an executive at Apple, then CEOs of Claris Software, Go Corporation, and eventually Intuit. And then that was the second phase of his career as business executive. And then around 2000, he stepped down as CEO of Intuit and became really a full-time coach. He was introduced to Eric Schmidt by John Doerr, who's a well-known venture capitalist here in the Valley. Eric was just taking over as CEO at Google, and John suggested that maybe Eric could use some coaching. And so Bill became Eric's coach. Bill had also become very close with Steve Jobs over the years, starting when he initially worked at Apple. And then when Steve returned to Apple in 1997, I believe it was, to become the CEO of Apple and really resurrect that company, Bill was the first board member he invited to come on board. So Bill, while he was helping Steve Jobs rebuild Apple, he was helping Eric, Larry and Sergey, Jonathan and others build Google, and went on to a remarkable career coaching many, many executives here throughout Silicon Valley.
Mm-hmm. And for the purpose of listeners, do you want to share some of the prominent names just for us to get a sense of the sort of the level at which he was operating?
Sure. I mentioned Steve Jobs, of course. He worked with others at Google, at Apple, Eddie Q, Phil Schiller. Here at Google, besides Eric Schmidt, he worked with our other co-author, Jonathan Rosenberg, who ran products here at Google, worked with Alan Eustace, our head of engineering, worked with the founders, Larry and Sergey, worked with our CFO, Patrick Brichette, and then Ruth Porat. So that's just those two companies. Other people we interviewed, Bill sat on the Apple board for many years. And so he worked with many other Apple board members. Al Gore, the former vice president of the U.S., was one of them. I'm drawing a blank on some of the other names. I know Nirav Tolia, who was the founder of Nextdoor, Dan Rosenzweig, who's the CEO of Chegg, Shelley Archambault, who was the CEO of MediaStream. He continued to work with Intuit and closely with Brad Smith, the CEO of Intuit, who recently stepped down. And then, the list just goes on and on. Sheryl Sandberg, of course, I should note, who was he started to work with as a CEO when she was an exec here at Google, and of course, as she continued on at Facebook. And, the list goes on.
Just picking up on a different theme, Alan, I was curious about some of the transitions that Bill made, right? From transitioning from being a college football coach to becoming a business leader to becoming a business coach to some of the largest tech companies. Give us a sense of how he sort of adapted himself along the way and what stayed the same as he transitioned across these different contexts.
Well, since I didn't know Bill at the time and he didn't really talk that much about his own history, it's hard to fill in the gaps on, exactly what he was thinking or how he approached it. The consistent theme, though, was the concept of team and team as a community. If you think about when you're working on a sports team, you really want everybody to come together, put aside individual differences, play their role, play their part, and help the team win. And you really want people that care about the team winning. And I think that's true in sports, and that was his approach in business. All about coaching individuals and helping the team win. And that's what he expected out of people. So I think that's sort of the level of consistency. And I do know, just from anecdotes from both his coaching days and his business days, is that he really felt it was, there's a community. When you're talking about team as community, it's not just in the workplace and people working together, but it's also, getting to know each other, getting closer as a team. So he was always very, felt it was very important for teams, to get to know each other, to work together, to socialize a little bit, and get past your, every team does their common team building stuff and the occasional offsite. But Bill would get a little deeper than that. Bill really got to know people as people. And I think that was another consistent thread throughout his career, and one that he brought into his coaching work here at Google and other places.
And, the first question that comes to mind is, a lot of these are competitors at some level, right? Some of these organizations, they compete intensely in the world of business. So how did Bill go about managing these Chinese walls of confidentiality?
Yeah, good question. And, first and foremost, the competition between Apple and Google, which, led to several lawsuits. So things were pretty tense there for a while. And Bill was, as I mentioned, very close with Steve Jobs, and of course worked closely with people here at Google. So how did he manage that? And I think, the answer is trust. He, first and foremost, with anybody that he worked with, he established, a really strong, we call it an envelope of trust. And I think that's critical for any coaching relationship. People knew that when they were talking to Bill, that he had integrity, he would keep things in confidence, and he truly had the best wishes, the best interests of the person he was coaching in mind at all times. People knew that Bill had their back. Bill wanted what was best for them. That was his only agenda. And so it was because of that trust that he could continue to work with, competitors like Apple and Google, even through the tensest of times, because everybody knew that they could truly trust him. I would think that most coaches don't work in such tense environments and such competitive environments, working with two competitors like that. But still, this element of really building really strong trust with someone is a critical first step toward building a good coaching relationship.
Mm-hmm. And based on the interviews you did, you mentioned you've spoken to 80 plus people while writing this book. Are there anecdotes or things that come up that he did to build that trust?
Yeah, we have a few principles in the book about this. I should note that Bill passed away in April of 2016, and the idea for this book really came up during the memorial service. Eric Schmidt was there, and he was talking with Philip Schindler, who runs business operations here at Google, and they were talking about how Bill had so many important principles. And there's so much that people could learn from him, and we needed to do something to make sure that these principles were not lost. And so I had worked with Eric and Jonathan on a previous book called How Google Works. And so after the memorial service, the three of us got together and said, well, what could we do to both honor Bill, but also codify his principles? And that's when we came up with the idea for this book. And we did interview over 80 people that, all of the names that I just gave you. And really, this book is not a biography of Bill. It's really to try to delve into what was his approach to coaching, what made him so unique. So to answer your question about building trust, these things are simple things to do, and yet sometimes they're hard to do. For example, just to listen intently. For example, right now, as you and I are talking, I've got my phone up here on the desk next to me, and it's face up. And, if someone were to text me or to send me a chat or a Snapchat or something, I'd probably be distracted for a minute. I'd glance over there. So, with Bill, he'd put the phone away, as I'm doing now. You can't see that, but I'm putting the phone away. And, he'd just be there. The term being present is sort of a common phrase, at least it is here in California. But, Bill really was doing that well before that was a common phrase. He would just really, truly listen. And then he would answer with full candor. A colleague of ours, Kim Scott, recently wrote a book, Radical Candor. And I think Bill sort of practiced that, this idea that, he would really tell you honestly what he felt and what he thought was the right thing, and not hold back. And he could do that because that he was coming from a position of really caring about your best interests. And, finally, Bill would show up. We had, we talked to so many people who, when they were going through a tough situation, Bill was there, and not just with an email, but, sometimes physically show up, like come over to their house and talk to them and just be there. And that sort of thing is how you build trust with people. When someone shows up at your door when you're sick or something's going on and says, "Hey, what's going on? You want to take a walk? You want to just talk about things?" That really builds trust in someone, and that trust will help you survive any, all sorts of conflicts or challenges.
And what was inspiring to read, Alan, was I understand that he did this all free of cost, right? He'd made the money he wanted, and at some point he said, I wanted to give back, and this was his way of giving back to the society. So that was truly inspiring to read that. Not everyone can afford to do that. Bill had been very successful in his business career, didn't feel like he needed to make any more money. One of the people we interviewed was Dan Rosenzweig, who's the CEO at a company called Chegg here in Silicon Valley. And Dan really credits Bill for saving Chegg and really helping turn that company around. And he said, when Bill showed up, he said, Bill, this is a quote from Bill, I don't take cash, I don't take stock, and I don't take shit. I hope I can say that on your podcast. And so, he just, he didn't take payment. He just wasn't interested in that. He was doing this because he felt that he had something he could help, that he was good at coaching and good at helping teams come together. And he believed in these companies. He believed in what Google was doing. He believed in what Apple was doing. He believed in what Intuit was doing. He believed in what Chegg was doing. All these companies he felt, really had a valuable vision and a valuable mission, and he wanted to help. So, again, this is not something that everyone can afford to do, but it's what Bill did. He, this was kind of his retirement hobby, although he worked awfully hard at it. And the other thing that really struck me was the notion of a team coach, right? In a way, I think in one of the interviews, you or one of the other co-authors mentioned that it's almost a product that Bill invented that's worth replicating in other situations. So I want to sort of unpeel that a little bit. So talk to us a little bit about how he went about being a coach of a team, right? So how is it different from coaching an individual, number one? And number two, how did he go about engaging with the team as a whole, and what was the rhythm? So talk to us a little bit about this notion of a team coach.
Yeah, this was something that was really one of the surprising revelations to us that we discovered through doing the research on the book and talking, interviewing people and really thinking through Bill's approach. People commonly think of executive coaching as a one-on-one, situation, which it is for the most part. And except, at least in the work that Bill did here, he met with several individuals. He was coaching many different individuals here at Google. And each of them thought that he was their executive coach. But in fact, what he was really doing was making sure that the team was working well together. And so if you think of a team sports coach, whether it be American football or baseball or cricket, soccer, the coach will sit down with individuals and help them work on their game. But the coach also needs to observe the team and make sure that the team is working well together. And that involves both the stars of the team, but also all of the other people in a team that helps the team perform successfully. And so Bill would, how does one do that? Of course, he would continue to meet with the individuals, but he would also observe the team in action. So, a team coach, you're down on the field with the team. You're observing the team in action. You're talking to them as the game is on. And that's what Bill would do. So here at Google, he sat in on Eric's staff meetings every week. He wasn't really a member of the staff. He just sat in on the staff meetings every week. And normally he was, pretty quiet in the staff meetings. He wasn't too vocal, but he would observe who was happy, who was being heard, who was not being heard. And and then afterwards he might go to Eric and say, here's something I observed about how your team is working, in this particular situation, this person, I don't think this person really was fully heard, or, things like that. So I think this is the difference between, this concept, which Eric started to coin as one of the new innovations from Silicon Valley, is executive coaching of teams. And, one thing Bill said a lot is you can't get anything done without a team, and business is a team sport. And that's really true. We all think of ourselves as, individuals and how we're managing our individual careers and so on, but nothing happens without a team in business. And so that's what his approach was, to really look at the team.
Got it. And maybe just to stick with it, Alan, if we looked at Bill's pie chart of time, right, the way he spent time at Google, give us a sense of what that picture looks like. What sort of things did it include?
I'm sort of smiling at this concept of a pie chart of time, because if there's anyone who seemed to have 30 hours in a day instead of 24, it must have been Bill, because everyone we talked to would just speak about his high energy, and I don't he worked out like other people, he slept like other people, of course, but I do think his because he didn't really have so much. It wasn't, this concept of work-life balance, which is a healthy concept, but it sort of assumes sort of a dividing line. And I think Bill was always building communities, and, he really genuinely liked and cared for the people he worked with. So it wasn't really, work versus life. So his pie chart was just full. He was just talking to people all the time. He, did a lot of phone calls at night, that sort of thing. So I don't know that I could really break down, time management for him in his time here at Google. Except I would say, it was probably, he would go to Eric's staff meetings every week, and then he would just meet people one-on-one. And, and especially in the early days when he was first starting at Google, he did a little bit of just walking around. There's an old management phrase, management while walking around, which may have been coined at Hewlett Packard, or at least it was used there. And that's the concept of just, going around and chatting with people, checking in on them. But I don't know exactly, if we wanted to talk about percentages, I don't think I could really accurately portray that. Sure.
I was just looking for what are some of the things that he might have done in addition to what executive coaches do that work with individuals. I mean, you did mention he sat in on meetings.
Yeah. I've worked with executive coaches myself, and I'll go have a session with the coach, and that's it. Then we don't see each other for a few weeks, and that's fine, and that's highly effective. But what Bill did was he was actually present in the office. He sat in on meetings. He sat in on Eric's meetings. Occasionally sat in on Jonathan's meetings. We have an anecdote from Marissa Mayer where he sat in on a couple of her meetings. So again, if you're going to be a team coach, you need to observe the team in action and not just the individual players.
Got it. And one of the things that's mentioned in the book also is the notion of unlocking the potential of aberrant geniuses, people that are spiky and sometimes could be high maintenance. So give us a sense of where he would draw the line on how much aberration he would take to tolerate a genius. How did he manage those? This is always a great management challenge, isn't it?
And I think the one thing, this wasn't so much, we didn't get this so much from Bill, but we talked about this concept in our other book, How Google Works, as well. Aberrant geniuses often need protection from senior management. We live in an age where individual employees, superstar employees, can have a huge impact, because they can just be so highly leveraged using technology tools, especially if you're in the technology business, where, in places like Google, superstar software engineers and product managers can just have enormous impact. They can create whole new product categories. And, and lots of times they can be difficult, but, if managed and coached properly, they can have enormous impact, both to the bottom line, to your product suite, but also to your culture. You need to protect those people because sometimes they are difficult and the culture may want to push them out. So, one of the first lessons I think of aberrant geniuses is to do your best to protect them if they have a few, key characteristics correct. What would those be? One is integrity. You of course cannot tolerate lying, abusive behavior, harassment, anything like that. Of course, that can't be tolerated. Two, and this is something Bill would always look for, and I think is super important, is a team first mentality. Look, these aberrant geniuses, if it's all me first, me first, me first, then that's a problem. But many of them, even though they can be difficult to work with, really are trying to do what's best for the team. Maybe they want a little bit of the spotlight on them as well, but they really want to do what's best for the team. So that's really what you're looking for, is integrity and a team first attitude. When things start to go wrong is when it's all either a lack of integrity or other, poor behaviors that can't be tolerated. A more of a me first attitude, and also just, we actually talked about this a lot when we were working on the book, because it's a hard decision to make. When is it too much? And so we kind of came up with a formula, which is just when, as a manager or a coach, if you're just spending way too much time, cleaning up from the toxicity of the aberrant genius, then that's probably enough. I don't even have a formula for that, but just look at the time you spend managing that person or cleaning up around that person. And there just comes a time when that gets to be too much. And we've had situations here at Google where there were wonderful, highly productive people that did amazing, great things. And then at some point it was just time for them to move on. And usually they kind of agree with it. We get that question a lot. And, it's a hard, these are difficult situations. People who haven't operated businesses and managed in companies underestimate how hard these people issues are to deal with.
Mm-hmm. And moving to a different theme, Alan, the other thing that really struck me was Bill's ability to land tough feedback. And what's striking is he's not necessarily Mr. Nice, right? Like you said, quite tough and quite filled with expletives, I understand, in terms of the language he used. Give us a sense of what we can learn from Bill on landing tough feedback or having difficult conversations.
Yeah, well, first on the language, he did have a rather salty vernacular that he loved to use. He cussed all the time. It was almost always jovial. Sort of like you would expect, a football coach or some other old guy, oh, F this, F that, but always sort of in a fun, jovial way. Mm-hmm. I think actually when he was giving feedback, he was never angry. Sometimes people using expletives can do it in anger. And in that case, it's harsh and it's too harsh. And that was never Bill's practice. When he was cussing at you, it was, don't F it up, but it's sort of always said with a smile and a wink, He also hugged a lot, which was just part of his personality, part of his style. But I don't want anyone to get the impression that this was just an always easygoing, nice, big teddy bear of a guy. He was first and foremost an excellent business manager. He was an excellent operations person, and he expected people to speak up and to have a perspective. And perhaps maybe they would disagree with the decision, but they needed to rally behind the decision. And so, we talked to a lot of people about Bill's approach to firing people, Bill's approach to giving people feedback and, letting them down easily. And so, he would give a lot of candid feedback, and occasionally he had to fire people. But again, people always knew it was in the best interest of you as an individual and you and for the team. Jonathan tells this story of how he was, Jonathan, could be pretty demonstrative, pretty outspoken as a manager. And he actually landed himself on a list that came out, I think it was in 2007, on one of the local, I think it was Valley Wag or something. It was just one of these rags that cover Silicon Valley. And this list was the top 10 terrible tyrants of tech. And, Steve Jobs and Steve Ballmer and Mark Benioff and all these people that can be famously difficult. And there was Jonathan on the list. And Jonathan was pretty happy because it was a pretty notable list of people. But then when he went next to see Bill, Bill was not happy. Bill was angry at Jonathan about this because he didn't feel like, and this was the feedback he was giving Jonathan. It's like, no, we didn't bring you. We brought you in to manage and coach people, not to yell at them. That's not your job. That's not, what you ought to be doing. Maybe a Steve Jobs can get away with yelling at people because he's a brilliant genius. Jonathan, you're not. and that was the feedback. And so it was a pretty harsh meeting. And then Jonathan said, okay, well, what else are we going to talk about? And Bill said, that's it. We're done. Go think about this. So we really chewed him out, gave him a lot of feedback. But what was interesting, and Jonathan found this out later, that Bill then called Shona Brown, who was our head of human resources at the time, and said, hey, Shona, check in on Jonathan. I chewed him out pretty good. Make sure he's okay. And this happened a few times where Bill would give someone really tough feedback, but then he would sort of go around the corner to a peer and say, hey, check in on that person, make sure they're okay. So he really was, even when he was giving direct, honest feedback, and sometimes, it could be pretty harsh, he also wanted to make sure that the person was okay. And I think this is a lesson for all of us. We talked to Diane Green, who was a Google board member, former CEO of VMware, ran Google Cloud for a while. And she said, when she was talking to someone in public, she always said, you could always come up with something nice to say about someone. Even if, let's say, they had massively screwed up, say something nice about them, give them some positive feedback. But then in private, give them the harsh feedback. You are not doing them a favor by holding back. And that was Bill's practice as well.
Got it. And back to his style, clearly it's an acquired taste, right? It gets along. Some people would be able to deal with it better than the others. But back to Bill, you talk about Bill having an ego and spending his energies on coaching the coachables. So I'm curious about what he looked for when he was trying to assess the coachability of an individual. How did he pick his coachees?
He did have an ego, and he could get angry. He wasn't a saint. He was a human being. And what he looked for was people that were coachable. And I know this sounds sort of obvious, but not everybody's coachable. And what does coachable mean? It means that you have to be willing to be vulnerable and to be humble enough to understand that you have some more to learn. And you need to be honest about your mistakes, your fallibility, and be willing to keep learning. And so I think that's the number one thing in coachability, is someone who's willing to hear the feedback, to understand their own weaknesses, and always be wanting to get better. Always wanting to get better. One of Jonathan's favorite quotes comes from John Wooden, who was a famous college basketball coach here in the States, coached for UCLA in the 60s and into the 70s. And John Wooden has a lot of great quotes, but one of them is, it's what you learn after you know it all that counts. And think about it, that's such a cool quote, because all of us are pretty, we think we're pretty hot stuff. We think we know it all, especially if we're younger. And it's what you learn next that really matters. And I'd say that's what Bill was looking for. We heard something very interesting from Sundar Pichai. Sundar, who's the CEO of Google now, and he was one of the people that was coached by Bill over the years. And he said, when he ascended to become CEO of Google, he worked even more closely with Bill. And Bill cautioned him even more closely to not really think about the members of his team. Who do you want on your team? What are the right strengths? What are the right complementary strengths? And then to watch how they work together. So one of the interesting things that Sundar said that he really looks for is, how do people cheer each other? People will come in. These are very senior people, of course. They're direct, reporting to the CEO of Google. And of course, they'll come in and talk about their accomplishments and be all proud. But what you're looking for is people that are excited and proud when other people accomplish something. They're excited for the team. They're excited for their teammates. I think that's one of the things that Bill would look for.
Got it. And the other thing that sort of comes up in the book is Bill being an evangelist for courage, right? You talk about the fact that Bill believed that his coachees could be greater than what they themselves believed. I'm curious about how that showed up in the way he connected with people and the coaching relationship played out.
This was as I said before, many of these things that he did are quite simple. It's just that we don't take the time to do them. And also many of these things, our thesis of the book is that the best coach of the team is the manager of the team. So many people, when they hear us talk or read the book, they say, oh, I need an executive coach like Bill Campbell. Well, first of all, there's no one like Bill Campbell, and he's not with us anymore. And there are other fine executive coaches, but if you're the manager of a team, to be the most effective leader, you can also practice some of these coaching principles. Sometimes you need to take off your management hat, put on your coaching hat. And one of these is this idea of this evangelist for courage. This was a quote we got from Shona Brown, which was, or was it Ruth Porat? Now I can't recall. I think it was Shona. But her point was, Bill would make you believe in yourself almost more than you believed in yourself. And as a manager, Bill wanted managers to make their people be an evangelist for courage for their people. In the workplace, in any place, people tend to be risk averse. They don't want to fail. And so it's the manager's job to actually push people to be more daring, to be more courageous. So to become an evangelist for courage, push people to do more by making them believe they can do it. And usually they can. So that's a lot of what we want from a coach is someone, yes, we need people to correct us when we do something wrong and, help us learn. But sometimes you just want someone to cheer, say, man, you're awesome. Keep going. And so, one of my favorite anecdotes from our book is we were talking to Clay Bavor. Clay is a VP here at Google. He oversees our VR and AR products, virtual reality and augmented reality products. And at the time that this story took place, Clay was a product manager, and he was just starting to work on AR products. And he was showing an early VR products. He was showing an early product to the Google board. So he was kind of nervous. He's up in front of the Google board and he's demonstrating this thing, and they're all wearing the goggles and trying them out. And he's trying to walk people through this demo, and something went well. And he hears this clap from the back of the room, like boom, 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 like loud cheering. And it's Bill Campbell cheering him on. And Clay said that moment gave him such confidence and such a boost. And think about it, how often when you're in a meeting and something goes well or someone on your team does something well, you say, like good job or something like that, of course. But how often do you like, yeah, man, stand up and clap? You don't, because it doesn't feel right. But that's what Bill would do. So that's part of being an evangelist for courage is really cheering people and celebrating their successes. And there's an interesting sort of tactical component as well. When we were talking to one of the Apple board members, I don't recall, he talked about how Bill would do this in an Apple meeting as well. Eddie Q told us about how Bill did this when he was showing the Apple board the Apple Play Store for the first time, and how Bill was like cheering and saying, this is so awesome. And it also sort of gets momentum going in the room if you want to make a decision that way. It's pretty hard to decide against or argue against something when someone has literally stood up and cheered for it. So, there's a tactical aspect as well. But mostly this concept of being an evangelist for courage is just this idea of blowing confidence into people, just trying to boost them up, make them think they can do more than they think they can do.
And in the book, you talk about cheerleading as well. And you talk about the distinction between cheerleading and developing a positive mindset. And I thought that nuance is quite interesting. Could you talk about the distinction?
Well, cheerleading is more an act. It's just a specific thing you do in the moment. Like all our point is there is that when someone does something good, go overboard in cheering for it. But the positive mindset, I think is more about the building the team and the community and having a vision for the company. And just, look, I think one of the hardest things in business, particularly, businesses that are not in the startup mode, is failing. Here in Silicon Valley, failure is sort of part of the culture. But, even here as the company, as a company like Google gets bigger, you gotta be willing to fail, and it gets harder because people get punished for failure. You're seen as a failure. And so I think the positive mindset is try for greater things, think bigger, push yourself, challenge yourself. And yeah, you're going to fail, but continue, with the positive mindset, learn something from that and keep going. Is that what you're referring to?
Sure. No, I think just going off script a little bit, Alan, I was curious. The book really talks about all the successes and the people that he impacted positively, and clearly it was written as a tribute to Bill. But I was curious I was curious about how Bill received feedback. How did he take in feedback as a coach, and did you come across any failures or places where he wasn't effective? I was curious.
We don't want to make him out to be a god and that everything was perfect. I don't know. Again, I didn't work directly with Bill. Most of what I know about Bill came through all of our interviews. I don't know if you could say that Bill, whether or not he took feedback or not, because most of the people we talked to were coachees of Bill. But I think that he would take it very well. I mean, he really appreciated authentic conversations, and I'm sure it worked both ways. So I think he himself was highly coachable his entire life. And as far as failures, again, people, we would ask people, did Bill ever steer them wrong? And the answer was no. And oftentimes this was because Bill wasn't exactly telling people what to do. And this may be a different, slight difference between business coaching and team coaching. Team coaching, sports coaching, someone will say, hey, move a little to your right and, take a step back and bend your knees more. I don't know, whatever, whatever the sport is, it can get very, into the details. Bill's approach on business coaching, and most executive coaches, I think, are like this, are more about telling stories, like listening and saying, okay, well, I had a situation like this once, and here's what I did, and here's what I learned from that. And so let's, go back to your situation. What do you think is the right thing to do? Oftentimes in these coaching sessions, Bill would not come out and tell you what to do. Bill would illustrate stories, and then you'd reach your own conclusion of what to do. And so it's hard to pinpoint when he was wrong in that approach. I can't think of any. There is a well-documented case of failure in Bill's career, which was the company Go, which he was the CEO of in the mid-90s. And Go was an attempt to build a handheld computer, personal organizer and computer. So it was the precursor to the Palm Pilot and really today's smartphones. But it was ahead of its time technology-wise, and it failed. And, so he was the CEO of this company that did not succeed. And I'm sure there were mistakes made along the way there. I can't enumerate them. I can't recall them. But there was a book by Jerry Kaplan called Startup. Jerry was the co-founder of Go, that gets into those. So he did have one notable large business failure, which was Go. But in the coaching realm, no, nothing that I can think of. One thing we talk about in the book, we go into some detail on decision making. And, one of the guys we interviewed was John Doerr. And he had an interesting thing to say about decisions, which was that you never know if you're making the right decision. And oftentimes there are multiple right decisions. So, go through the right process and then make the decision. And sometimes that's the wrong decision. But you can always run the right process. So you can get to the wrong decision and still be running the right process.
And you saying that in the context of Bill to say that he would ensure that people follow the right process for decision making?
Yeah, exactly. In the coaching, I think Eric in particular learned a lot from Bill on this, and they talked a lot about decision making. Look, one of the most important things managers do is make decisions. And like I said before, you can't guarantee that you're going to make the right decision. You can never guarantee that. But you can guarantee that you run a good decision-making process. And that process entails making sure everybody is heard. Everyone needs to make sure that whatever side they're arguing, they have a chance to really be heard. And sometimes in meetings, there are the people who are the outspoken ones, who are always talking. They'll always get heard. But, you need to look for the people who maybe aren't so outspoken, maybe aren't comfortable in arguing against, a more powerful person in a meeting context. There are other ways to make sure that person gets heard, side meetings, in the hallway, that sort of thing. So when you're running a decision-making process, one, make sure you hear every possible perspective and really stay open to it. And then, Marissa Mayer tells this story of how, look, Marissa is such a smart person, and she had a hard time doing this. But Bill was coaching her that, in your meetings, when you're discussing decisions, he made a rule for herself to follow. Don't say a word other than, maybe prompting other people to speak. Don't opine until everyone else has had a chance to speak. Because, of course, when the leader speaks up, then people are going to, maybe want to align with that or whatever. And so, Bill's advice to Marissa was kind of stay quiet until she heard all the perspectives. So number one, hear all the perspectives, but then sometimes you got to make a call. We've all been in situations where people would just get an analysis paralysis and not make the call. And so when the team is talking about something and everyone's had a chance to be heard, lots of times the right decision will just come out of that discussion. But if it doesn't, the manager needs to make the call. And then everybody needs to rally behind it. And this is not consensus. Bill would talk about, I hate consensus. I hate the concept of consensus. Because the concept of consensus is getting everyone to agree, which will often lead to a watered down decision, which is not the right one. What it really is, my boss here at Google talks about it as disagree and commit. Okay? I spoke up in the meeting. I had a chance to be heard. I don't agree with the decision we made. I think it's the wrong decision, but I'm on this team and I'm in. I'm going to play all in for this decision and not sabotage it in any way. And that's the sort of behavior Bill would expect. One of my favorite anecdotes in our book is just a little anecdote. It came from Rachel Whetstone. Rachel ran policy and communications here at Google for a long time. And she was in Eric's staff meeting, and there was something the company was doing or was planning on doing, and she didn't want to do it. She thought it was a bad move. And she argued passionately against this. She's a very passionate person and argued very passionately about it. And she lost. After the meeting, and Bill noted that she was disappointed in this. So after the meeting, he found her and he said, "Hey, Rachel, that didn't go your way." And as she was expecting kind of a pep talk and, him telling her to, maybe there's another way to get her decision made or something like that. And instead he basically said, "That didn't go your way this time. Suck it up. Go with what the team decided. Maybe you'll get them next time." And that was it. You didn't get it. You disagree, but they made a decision. You're on this team. You've got to be all in on it. That was his attitude.
This is your host Deepak Jayaraman here. It's interesting to hear Alan speak about Bill's approach in ensuring that leaders followed the right process in making a decision. If I may relate it back to my experience, when I work with leaders in their individual capacity through a career or life transition, a big part of the work is actually ensuring that they're getting the process right. It's often about the following steps. Number one, are the leaders developing a healthy level of awareness in terms of strengths, sources of energy, passion, and a clear sense of what matters to them as they move forward? I ensure that this is a combination of insight that often comes through reflection and outsight, which is often how people see them. Number two, are they making a coherent go-to-market in the context of the various pathways they can undertake and going after it in a systematic and a thoughtful way? And number three, are they exploring enough? Several of the people that go through these transitions get insecure very quickly during this phase of transition when there's often an identity vacuum and want to grab onto the first thing that comes their way. It might be efficient, but may not be effective in terms of setting them up for the future. One of my earlier guests, Herminia Ibarra, speaks about the need to explore adequately and reflect on our experiences before we converge onto something.
But in fact, what we're doing is trying to explore and compare and contrast, and how do I feel here and how did I feel there? And so when you give yourself, and that's why it takes time, that's why the time factor plays in, to explore more divergently and say, this is actually natural, and it gives me more information so that then I can make the right choice. You make better decisions and you're less likely to do the other thing, the foreclosure, which is take the first thing that comes your way because it's been 6 months and I can't tell people anymore that I'm still, out of work. And so the delayed commitment comes from understanding that it's going to take time and you're not going to go for the first thing that comes up or the second thing until you've really had a chance to test. Because once you jump, you're going to be stuck there at least another 2 years. And so why not take a little longer at the beginning in order to make a more robust choice?
And back to the process of making a good decision, the fourth thing that we often work through is having a robust decision-making criterion based on the self-discovery during the assessment phase and subsequently through the phase of experimentation. I realized that in something as nebulous as a career transition, especially when somebody is at crossroads, the best bet is to ensure that we follow the right process to get to a meaningful outcome. Given that it might take a while to figure out whether it was the right direction or not, that's the best hope we have to get to a meaningful outcome. Do tune into my conversation with Herminia Ibarra and Tasha Urich if this element is of specific interest to you. Now, let's get back to the conversation with Alan Eagle. And the other thing that really struck me, Alan, is, in the book you talk about observing from the stands and not being affected by being in the game, right? And I'm curious about, the nuance here in the context of how Bill built his nuanced picture of what's going on in Google.
Well, this is a hard thing to do if you're an operating manager or a leader in a company. It was an easier. By that, all we mean is that Bill really didn't have any agenda other than he wanted Google to succeed, or Apple to succeed, or Intuit to succeed. He was really all about the team, and the team being successful, the team being the company. And you can do that if you're not running a particular division or a particular group. If you're running a particular group, you also got to, you worry about your group and am I going to get the right head count? Am I going to get the budget I need? And sometimes those worries can overwhelm the concern for the overall company. And Bill just didn't have to deal with that. And I think that's part of why, he didn't want to sit on the board. He was not on the Google board. He was an advisor to Eric and others, but he was not on the Google board. He didn't want to be on the board.
Mm-hmm.
Because it would actually, he felt it would hinder him from doing the coaching work that he wanted to do. Because then he had an official position and a kind of an agenda and so on. So, if companies do have external team coaches like a Bill Campbell, it's important that they don't have an operating role and that they're just in it for the good of the team.
Got it. And just a couple of questions to wrap up, Alan.
Sure.
How did Bill think about success and impact in the way he went about his coaching and the way he led his life? In a way, you mentioned this was a part of a give back, given that he had sort of satisfied all the material needs that he had. But having said that, what in your understanding was his yardstick for success?
Well, of course, you use the phrase that we use in the conclusion of the book. He really wanted to help other people be successful, and particularly he loved watching people that he worked with ascend to leadership positions, CEO positions. That's how he measured success. He just got great joy out of helping people become their best possible, greatest selves. Shona Brown, who I mentioned earlier, was a senior executive here at Google. And he was very disappointed when Shona could have been a CEO at any one of a number of companies. But when she left Google, she decided to do other things and not become a CEO. And Shona told us how disappointed Bill was in her, because he just felt she had such greatness in her and had so much to give people. And he wanted to coach her as a CEO. On the other hand, Ruth Porat, who's the CFO here at Google, was in the CFO role at Morgan Stanley. And Bill met Ruth through some affiliation at Stanford. And he got to talk to Ruth and he said, you got to come over here to Google, because Google was looking for a CFO. So he basically recruited Ruth Porat to become CFO at Google. And that brought him tremendous joy because it was good for Google. And he continued to coach Ruth and it was good for her. So this is what brought him joy, I think, was just seeing the people he worked with become as great and successful as possible. And he really was about community. He built communities wherever he went. I talked about, building teams in the workplace, but Bill had, trips he ran. Like he would run an annual Super Bowl trip where he'd get a bunch of people together and they'd go to the Super Bowl. He ran a little golf tournament among his friends in Cabo San Lucas in Mexico. He had these, he would go on a baseball trip with another group of friends where they'd go to Pittsburgh and go in other places on the East Coast and watch games. It was all about community and building community and family. He was close with his family. And so many people, I can't believe I haven't even brought this up and we're this late in the interview. So many people talked about love and Bill. and how they loved him and Bill loved them. And Bill would, he'd hug people and go, "I love you. I care about you." And he deeply did. And this is all a very much an avuncular, appropriate love. But he made it okay to bring love in the workplace. And that's what brought him joy, just the deep caring he had for people. And this was one of the things, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I have to reiterate, all of these, Bill was a unique individual, but all of these principles, bringing humanity and love into the workplace, cheering for people, learning how to make decisions, all of these are things that all of us can learn from. And I really feel that if you want to become a great leader, you need to be a great manager. You need to understand your business, run a tight ship, do a good job with hiring and performance reviews and all of those things. But then you also need to be a great coach, be an evangelist for courage for your people, know your people as people, show up for them. And you put those two things together, that's how you become a leader. And I think these are things anyone can do, and we can all learn from what Bill did and how he acted.
And maybe just changing the focus, Alan, if we flip it to the coaches that Bill worked with, did you observe any themes around what people did to get the most value out of Bill? Right, he was around, he was available, and he was there to coach, and he had a generous mind. He was generous. But did you hear stories about how people tapped into him and got the most out of him? Are there any stories or anecdotes?
Well, there's several of what people learned from him and how they helped. There's too many. I think the overall, we're talking to a lot of very successful people. And yet when talking about Bill, what came through was humility. We're sitting down and talking to Al Gore, the former vice president of the United States, and he's talking about how much he learned from Bill and how much fun he had with Bill. You think about Al Gore. Al went into business after he left politics after 2000 and was really, a little bit of a neophyte as a business executive. And he did learn a lot about business from Bill. Bruce Kaizen, who was the former CEO of Adobe, talked about how he was a salesperson at Adobe, and Adobe was a technology company. But he learned from Bill the simple things of stopping and talking to people, going and talking to the engineers, sitting down and having lunch with them, chatting with them in the elevator or in the hallway, taking that extra 5 minutes and chatting with people and learning what they're doing. And through that, Bruce talked about how he really developed a deeper understanding of the product development process and the technology. And he ended up being the first non-technologist to become CEO of Adobe. And he attributed a lot of that to just this simple thing he learned from Bill, which is talking to people and listening. So, yeah, and there's more stories like that of, these very senior people, what they learned from him and how little ways that he helped them. Again, it's not like rocket science to stop and talk to people. It's just hard to take the time to do it.
Of course. And just the last question, in this podcast, I also try and talk about the various transitions and how people deal with transitions. In the book, you talk about Bill's role in two very crucial transitions at Google. One was when Google wanted to bring in an independent chairman of the board. And second was when Google and Alphabet were formed. Any insights around what he did around those transitions specifically, which stood out to a good place?
One thing that surprised me consistently through talking to people and doing the research for the book, which is that people at senior levels in the company are still humans. I mean, of course, that's obvious, right? But you tend to think, okay, they're very wealthy, they're powerful, they're extremely successful, they've got it made, right? What do these things matter that much? And yet they do. People have egos, more so, of course, the higher level you go in organizations. People have ambitions. So this transition, the one transition you're talking about, well, there was two interesting anecdotes that Eric wrote about in the book, which is one when when Google was going public, the board asked him to step down as chairman. They wanted him to stay on as CEO, but they wanted him to step down as chairman and someone else would become chairman. And this surprised and hurt Eric. And Eric decided he was going to quit. Now, this was before the company had gone public. This would have been an extremely bad decision from a personal standpoint, but he was hurt. And, in helping him write this section, it sort of struck me that, wait, you're hurt, your feelings are hurt, and that's why you're going to quit. That's completely irrational. And you're Eric Schmidt. But it didn't matter. He was hurt by it. And Bill kind of helped talk him off that cliff and say, look, no, you need to do what's right for the team and what's right for yourself and stay on as CEO. And don't worry, you're the right person to be chairman, and the board will figure that out, and you'll come back as chairman. And that's exactly what happened. Later, at the beginning of last year, 2018, Eric stepped down as executive chairman and really felt kind of lost. And again, when we were writing this section of the book, I was so surprised. This is Eric Schmidt, the former CEO of Google, a very wealthy man. Well, what's the problem? And yet, he's human. And he didn't have, in that case, Bill was not there to help him through it. And so, again, it doesn't matter where you are in the company. It's these human, when you're making a transition like that, people need people. Doesn't matter what level they're at. They need someone to talk to and someone to help them through the transition and someone to really understand that they are people. Maybe their feelings are hurt or maybe they're nervous about the future, and really to help them through that. And again, that's what an executive coach can help do.
Got it. This has been extremely insightful, Alan. Is there anything about Bill that I may not have touched upon in this conversation so far?
Gosh, I think we covered everything, at least everything we write about in the book. We've talked entirely about Bill's business career here in Silicon Valley. I do need to note he was chairman of the board of trustees at Columbia University for over, I think it was 12 years. So he, besides doing his work in the Valley at the same time as he was coaching Google and coaching Apple and many others, he was the chairman of the board of Columbia. There's probably not too many ex-football coaches who then go on to become the chairman of the board of their universities. That's pretty unique. And then he also, he coached football here in the Bay Area. He coached the middle school at a local school called Sacred Heart. He did that for 15 years. Some of the people that we talked to, we got to be friends with Bill, not through business in the Valley or anything. They got to be friends because, their kids went to school together and they coached football with them. And, and he would give sort of the same level of commitment to the kids as he did to executives here. In fact, sometimes he'd be on the field, every Tuesday and Thursday they'd have practice and he'd get a call from, like Steve Jobs, and the kids would see Steve Jobs on the caller ID and Bill would say, no, I don't have time. And, would not take the call. So he brought that same level of commitment, and building community in so many places. One other thing I'd like to add, of course, I'd love for people to read our book and hopefully learn from it. We do have a SlideShare version of the book. If you just do a search on your favorite search engine, $1 Trillion Coach SlideShare. And it's a PDF of, about 35 slides that captures all these principles. And if you don't have a couple hours to read our book, you can review the SlideShare in 5 minutes.
Got it. Lovely, Alan. Pleasure talking to you, and thanks for all the insights around Bill and his life.
My pleasure. I hope this was helpful, and I hope people try to practice some of these principles and become better coaches.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Take care. Thanks. Bye.
I hope you found the conversation as purposeful as I did. A couple of things struck me in this conversation. First, I was recently reading the book Late Bloomers by Rich Kalgard, where he says that we live in a society that celebrates precocity, with lists such as 40 under 40, 30 under 30, and so on. There's a lot of celebration of early success, but not enough commentary around late bloomers. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying early success is bad. I'm just saying that it's not presenting the full picture, which is often missed. To me, Bill Campbell seems like a great case study of a late bloomer. One of my guests at the podcast, Linda Grattan, I'll be publishing her conversation in a few weeks, speaks about the notion of 100-year life, where we need to be thinking about a journey differently. I see several people in their 30s, 40s, and 50s often burnt out and checked out. While they might have hit the financial milestones for themselves, they still have a big chunk of life to lead and make a difference. So to note that Bill Campbell moved from the world of sport to the world of business at 39, and from being a business executive to coaching at the age of 60 is fascinating. And to note that he was most remembered for the last innings much more than the other two is interesting as well. It talks to the point about finding a meaningful canvas for ourselves when we move from one innings to another. We might have achieved great heights, but our best days might be ahead of us. It's also interesting to note that Bill did not take $1 from anybody in his coaching journey. He did it purely out of a sense of passion and purpose. In a world where we often equate success with material gains, it's humbling to see someone like Bill making such a profound difference that possibly went on to impact thousands of lives and trillions of dollars. The second thing that struck me in the conversation with Alan, and this possibly comes out in a more pronounced way in the book, is that Bill spent a lot of time in meetings and in the corridors to really sync with the nuanced context at Google and some of the other companies he worked at. And that context made a non-trivial difference when it came to being of value, whether it was advising Eric Schmidt, Sundar Pichai, Marissa Mayer, or any of the other leaders he worked with. When I work with clients, I often tell them that if I have access only to the locker room and not the stadium where the game is happening, then I'm working with incomplete information, and it's hard for me to make sense of what's going on. I have to decode what's going on through the stories of the leader and some of the other players in the organization, which comes with its own signal distortion and noise. A similar point is made in a different context by Atul Gawande, a well-known surgeon, author, professor, and CEO of Haven, the healthcare venture started by Amazon, Berkshire Hathaway, and JP Morgan to improve health outcomes. In his book Better, that was published about a decade back, he speaks about the distinction between the view in a musical school, where you spend 10,000 plus hours, with all due respect to Malcolm Gladwell, and get onto the world of performance and you go from there. And he contrasts that to the world of sport, where you need a coach all the way to the top. Even a Roger Federer, who's considered the greatest tennis player of all time, needs a coach. He speaks about how he, as a surgeon, paid somebody, a gentleman called Bob Austin, to come into the operating room to observe him and critique him, however absurd the idea sounds. He speaks about the small things that Bob observed that were completely in the blind spot of Atul. He talks about external coaches as an external pair of eyes providing a more accurate picture of the reality. Now, this would not be possible if Bob didn't observe those things firsthand in the operating room. So if you're listening to the podcast and are a coach or working with a coach either for yourself or for somebody else in the organization, do pause and ask the question, what access are you providing to the real action for them to form an accurate picture of the reality? With that, let me wrap up this podcast conversation. Thank you for being with us as we turn 50. This just feels like baby steps in what I believe to be a long-term journey of curiosity and sharing. And I look forward to your company as we continue on this exploration. If you find the podcast of value, do rate and review on iTunes or on any of the other platforms where you consume the content. I would also urge you to check out the Pay It Forward section at playtopotential.com and contribute if you want to share your gratitude. Your contributions to Antarang Foundation will help thousands of young adults in India play to their unique potential. Thank you for listening. I look forward to having you at one of the subsequent conversations at the Play to Potential podcast.